We're now starting a new tshuva, which is going to be about returning a loan, but returning it to your friend's wife instead of to your friend. Okay, we did touch upon this when we were learning Imrei Yaakov. We learned about, and we also touched upon this when we were learning Hilchos Tzedakah in that sefer. If you recall, can a woman, what is the relationship halachically between a man's finances and his wife? If the man is the main breadwinner, what control does his wife have over his assets? So we learned that she can't give large tzedakah gifts. She can only give small tzedakah gifts because there's an assumption that the husband would be okay with that. And then as it came to just trying to remember what we learned about that in the Imrei Yaakov, I think that was also the discussion there. But there's a broader discussion of what are what is the how do we treat in halacha the commingling of funds between a husband and a wife? What is her rights? What are her rights? And what control does she have over her husband's assets? So in this situation, the question becomes, what if I return a loan to a woman when I owe the husband the money? So this is the question. Nasati leMeiron. I traveled to Meiron. So this is a guy who's all the way down in Yerushalayim. He schleps all the way up to Meiron. V'hayachaser li kesef, and I didn't have enough money on me. V'lachein hilveiti mechaveri kesef. So I had to borrow some money from a friend. Kishihigati li Yerushalayim, echzarti et hakesef li ishto shel chaveri. When I got back to Yerushalayim, my friend wasn't available. Maybe he was spending some more time in Meiron. So I gave the money back to his wife. V'gam kein sefer shelo shahaya mush'al etzli. And I also returned the sefer that he had lent me. I gave it to his wife. Ishto ibda et hakesef v'hasefer. His wife lost the money and the sefer. Okay. All right. There may be some issues. Maybe some issues in the marriage. So now the halachic question is: do I have to pay back my friend and buy him a new sefer because of the fact that I gave it to his wife? Okay, so this is the shaila, and it could happen to any of us. I happen to be at Sobeys and I see Mrs. So and so, and I say, "Do me a favor. I haven't seen your husband in a while, but I owe him some money. Can you please give this to him?" She goes ahead, and then when I see the husband a couple of weeks later, I say, "I hope your wife gave you the cash." And he says, "I don't know what you're talking about." Okay, so how do we deal with that? So Kosav Hatur Bedin Shimon Shahayalo Mashkon Miruvain Umasar Oso Biad Beno Shel Ruvain. So the Torah writes that if Shimon had an object that belonged to Ruvain, and in the course of returning it, instead of giving it to Ruvain directly, he gave it to Ruvain's son, Ruvain Omar Shazelo Higia Liyado. And Ruvain claims that he never got it. Pasak Harosh Shimon Poshea Shemisaro Liyad Ben Ruvain Afilu Shuhu Gadol. The Rosh says that this is an act of negligence on behalf of the person, on behalf of Shimon, who returned the object. And that's true, not just because the child may be a minor, even if the child is an adult, but you have no right to return something to a family member with the assumption that it's going to get to the person. But what about the Gemara in Bava Metzia that says that when you give something to a person, it's under the assumption that his wife and his children will be in charge of it also. In other words, there's going to be anyone who's living in that household is going to be, let's say, trusted by watching over that object. Zedafka b'pikadon shaharigilutu shigam hamafkid lo shomer et hapikadon shelo kasefet uchedome. He says that's only with a lent out object. He says the kasefet. I'm not sure what a kasefet is, but it seems like it's a with a certain kind of constancy. What is a kasefet? אבל הממשכן או משל חפץ לחברו צריך להחזיר אותו דווקא לידי הבעלים. In other words, when it comes to who's in charge of watching over an object, there's an assumption that when I give something to someone for safekeeping, they're going to be watching over it jointly together with the rest of the family. So if I decide a safe box is what a kasefet is, I should have figured that out. It's a safe. People don't leave objects that are given to them for safekeeping and put them immediately into a safe, unless there's a specific arrangement made for that purpose. So therefore, if someone gives me an object and I say, okay, I'm going to leave it in my sort of my private office in my home, okay, I'm going to put it in my drawer. There's an assumption that other people in my home may have access to that object, and that I trust the other people in the person who's lending it out trusts the other people in the home that they will be able to watch over it as well. But when you give when Shimon borrows an object, he has to, when it comes time to return it, it's not sufficient to return it to any other family member. It has to be returned to the owner directly. And that's the psak of the Shulchan Aruch as well. That's how the Shulchan Aruch paskins in Choshen Mishpat Siman Ayin Beis. The Kosov HaBeis Yosef Sham Bebeda Kabayas, Shekain Kosov HaRambam. This is also, the Beis Yosef writes that this is also the psak of the Rambam. The Shaharash Bakosov Shem Ishto Baladat V'hu Menicha Lisa V'litain. That the Rashba writes that if a man's wife is a balat dat, she's a smart person, she's up with the ways of the world, and v'hu minicha lisa v'litain, and a man allows his wife to deal with his assets and business, v'hu mamin lolova shemasar la et hakesef patur, and he sort of trusts that the lova gave him would give his wife the money. In other words, if he's not contesting the facts and he believes that the lova Shimon returned the money to his wife, and normally he does trust his wife with the assets of the home, so then Shimon is putter by giving it to the wife. And the only time that it's going to be a problem is if the Malva Ruvain claims, well, I don't trust my wife with any of that stuff. What right did you have to give it to her? She doesn't even have access to my bank account. So in those kinds of situations, I just met with a couple the other day. They're having serious marital problems because he is on a fixed income. They're on a fixed budget. And she just spends and spends and spends and doesn't know any self-control. And so he had to put her on a fixed budget. So in a situation like that, and by the way, like you think, oh, does this really happen in the real world? Yeah, I just met with a couple this week where this is why they may end up splitting up, because he doesn't trust her. And she acknowledges that she spends on things that he may not feel are important, but they're important to her, like getting, Botox injections and things like that. No, seriously. And she doesn't know how to spend within their budget because they're really on a fixed income. And so he gives her a certain allowance every month, and sometimes she blows through the allowance, which is supposed to be for the month. She blows through it in a week, and he doesn't know what to do. And he's at the end of his rope, and she's at the end of her rope because she needs it for her kids also. And so they're really haktatsaras. And so we tried to talk about it a little bit, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to help them. Like it may be too far gone at this point, but the point is that as it pertains to this halacha, um, you know that there are different kinds of relationships in marriages. There are a healthy marital relationship is where the husband says, I get my paycheck or I bring home the whatever I've earned, stick it in the bank, and it's my wife's job to spend it on whatever we need, right? That's I don't know. I've always lived my life. So in that kind of situation where I trust my wife and I let her have complete free hand in the assets of the home, so then and I believe the lova that he says he gave it to my wife, and she innocently loses it. So then the lova is going to be putter in that situation. What the Shulchan Aruch is referring to when the Shulchan Aruch says the guy's chayev, the debtor is chayev, is when the Malva Ruvain claims, I never let my wife handle my assets because she's reckless, she's careless. And that's the reason why giving it to her was an act of negligence, and therefore you have to think. Go ahead. Right. I wouldn't know that. And that's why I don't have a right to automatically make assumptions. Like if I don't know your relationship with your wife and I have no idea whether your wife is involved with your finances or not, then I should err on the side of caution and make sure, yeah, give it back to the. Yeah, well, the term balas das means is that, well, she's on the ball, I guess is what you'd say.
Trust her. She could be a bright lady and understanding stuff. You might not trust her. So what is the
I think it has to be both. She's a balas das, and as a result, the husband trusts her to handle the business affairs of the house.
It comes down to how do you know what she is?
You don't know.
Is he being trusted like Doug
said? Yeah, that's what Doug was asking. So you have to know in order to be able to give it to her.
Give her a test before you give the money back.
No, it's not only how smart she is. She may be brilliant, but she has no business acumen, and the husband, you don't know what the relationship is. The siyem habera kabayis shenira shagam harambam v'harosh sovrim kedas harashba the beisha shenosas v'nosenes v'soch habayis imnasim la potter. And the Beis Yosef concludes that everyone would agree to that. That if you know that the woman has free reign in the assets of the home, and she regularly does, dips into the funds of the house and spends the money. So then, by giving it to her, you're potter. And that's why the Rama adds the shita of the Rashba. Aval. A maharshal kasav the yesh hevdel bein pikadon the cholhecha the isa birshus marakama koi v'haraya shahanifkad potter ba'onsin. He says, however, the maharshal draws an interesting distinction. He says there's going to be a difference between a loan and an item that was given for safekeeping. A pikadon is, let's say, I lend you my lawnmower, okay, or I lend you my snowblower, okay, and then in that situation, the snowblower at every moment is considered to be the possession and the owned by the person who bought the snowblower, even if it's in the borrower's possession, okay, and the proof is that if, let's say, the borrower's house burns down or his garage, someone crashes into his garage where the snowblower is kept and it explodes in a fiery explosion like the thing at the border yesterday. Yeah. So then, and the snowblower is burnt to a crisp. So then the halacha would be that the borrower is putter. Why is he putter? Because it's an onus. I protected it in a normative fashion, and the object is owned by the other guy. It's owned by the owner, and as a result, just like it happened in my house, that way it could have happened just as easily in his house. and therefore I'm going to be potter. Lacheni maser la'adam sheneman al hamafkid potter. And therefore, by returning it to a person who is trusted by the owner of the snowblower, whether it's his wife, his child, or a neighbor, so then as long as I know that the guy trusts him to watch over it, then I'm potter. Aval bahalva shelahotzan nidna. But he says a loan is different. A loan, I can't say, I got cash out of the bank to pay you back, and on the way home, my car exploded in a fiery fireball, and the money was burned to a crisp, and therefore I'm putter from giving you your money. Doesn't work like that with a loan, because a loan was given to the borrower to do with it and spend it. So there's no specific dollar bill or sets of dollar bills that belong to the lender. And the cash is therefore always considered to be in the possession of the borrower, not the lender. And there can be no claim that there was a mishap with your money. Well, it's not my money until you put it back into my hands. And therefore, I have not fulfilled my obligation to give you back the money, the $100 that I borrowed from you, until I know that it's gotten in your hands. And until the time that it's gotten into the lender's hands, I have not fulfilled my obligation of returning a loan. And therefore, based on this Maharshal statement, we have to draw a distinction between a pikadon, an item that was lent to a person for let's say, a snowblower, versus cash. And therefore, when it comes to returning a loan, remember the question was the guy was in Meron, borrowed cash, and borrowed a sefer. So when it comes to the cash, the wife lost the cash. He says, "Afal pisha das hamaharshal hi shechayav yachol halova liton kimli kedas haramah hanal shepasek harash b'shuhu patur." He says, on the one hand, the lender can say, "I never got the cash," but using the shita of the Rashba, the Lova can argue, "I paskin like the Ramah, who says that as long as you trust your wife with all of your assets in your home," and that seems to be the case because I see her shopping at the supermarket all the time, and you give her reign over your assets. You don't make sure that she's limited. So therefore, and by your own admission, you trust her, and therefore, I could argue in Basin that I'm putter because I gave it to your wife, whom you trust. But ulagabe hasefer hamushal she'echzer leishat hamashiel. This is as far as the sefer that I gave back to your wife. Inei be'inyan pikadon pasek harama. The Ramah paskins that if you give an object like a snowblower or a sefer, you give it back to the wife of the owner, then you're potter. Amnam le'inyan she'ela pasuk harama sheshol shehechzer chayfetz le'ishan hamashel v'nenas chayav. So he says it all depends. The Ramah says when an item was given to a person to watch over it, in other words, you asked me a favor. You asked me, you're going on vacation. Would I mind watching your dog while you're on vacation? So with pleasure, I'm happy to watch your dog. Your wife gets home a couple of days before you. So I give her the dog. And so that's, the Ramah says, if the dog runs away after I gave it to your wife, then I'm potter. But when it comes to she'ila, but if I borrowed something from you for my benefit, so the Ramah paskins she'shoel shehechzer chayfetz leishat hamashil v'nenas chayav, that if a person borrows an object for his own use, and then he returns it to the guy's wife, and something happens to it afterwards, then I'm chayav. So what's the difference? Ubir hashach the dafka b'pikadon im hechzer leishat hanifkad patur. Ma she'en kein hamashil shehechzer et hachayfetz leishat chavero chayav. He says, the Shach explains, if something was given to you for safekeeping and you return it to his wife, you're putter. Whereas in a case of something that you borrow for personal use and you give it back to the guy's wife, you're chayev. He says, Hatamhu kevin sheshol kol hana shalo lachein tzarich lihizaher b'shmirato lachziro dafka leba'alim. Shach explains that since the borrower is getting full benefit out of the object, his level of obligation to make sure that it gets into the hands of the owner is even higher. Therefore, it would seem that in this situation, because you borrowed the sefer, not because your friend asked you to watch the sefer while he goes bowling, but you asked him, "Can I borrow this sefer? And when I see you next in Yerushalayim, I'll give it back to you." He says, in that situation, since you're benefiting from the sefer, you would be chayev. Omnam, however, kasav hanasivos hamishpat im eshes hamafkid eina rak shomeret al kesef ba'ala v'chafatzav elagam mit'aseket bahem kirtzona im hechzu lahamashil pater. The nesivos, however, throws another wrench, another twist, and he says that if a man trusts his wife not only to watch over his objects and his assets, but she also has full reign to use them. Like if I have a library, I don't restrict my wife from using any of my books, any of my svarim. So if she has full reign over my svarim, then if the borrower gives the sefer back to my wife, it's as if he gave it back to me, because he knows that my wife uses my svarim all the time, and therefore the guy would be pater. And when the Ramah says that the shoel is going to be chayiv in that case, it's only when she doesn't have the right to use the stuff herself. But if she has not only does the husband trust her to watch over it, but he also trusts her to use the stuff, so then any shoel who gives it back to the wife is going to be pater. Ve'alkein lahalacha im ishto shel hamalve nosa'at v'notenet b'toch habayit v'hu somech alea b'chol davar ze nechshav hashava le'inyan hakesef v'gam le'inyan hasefer u'patur. So in the final analysis, if the guy's wife, the lender's wife, is the type of person who has full reign over the house, the husband relies upon her for all matters, then it is considered to be a proper hashava saveda, or hashava, proper returning of a borrowed object, and therefore the guy is going to be pater both for the cash and for the sefer. I will tell you that I could certainly think of different cases where the guy will be chayev. So let's say, for example, a man is a collector of valuable, I don't know, what would you say? Coins, stamps, comic books, okay? And, right? And his wife thinks he's nuts, right? His wife thinks, this is stupid stuff. She doesn't realize how valuable the collection is. So he's told her, honey, I love you. You can have all of the money in the bank, but don't touch my stamps, right? The stamps are off limits. Or the baseball cards, perfect example, baseball cards, right? Honey, I know you think it's stupid. You think that I'm an idiot for spending $1,000 on a Mickey Mantle, right? Or whatever. I don't even know what a Mickey Mantle would go for today, right? But it's my hobby. I enjoy it. Don't touch my stuff. I lend a guy my Mickey Mantle, and I say, you can show it to your friends. You have some kind of event that you want to show them an original Mickey Mantle baseball card. I'm lending it to you. You're responsible for it. Return it when you're done, but you take full liability. He says, absolutely. He comes to my house after the event is over. He returns the Mickey Mantle to my wife. So that's a situation where I could see that in La Halacha, if she goes ahead and tosses it out with the mail or puts it somewhere where the whole thing melts and burns up, or she leaves it in the kitchen next to the stove or whatever it is, I could easily hear a based in paskening, and the svara would dictate that the borrower is liable, is chayav in that situation, because the husband doesn't trust her for this valuable item, right? So it really all depends on the circumstance. In most situations, however, right, with objects that are not of, very, very high value, returning something, well, certainly cash, to the wife leaves you off the hook. And with this couple that I counseled this week, if a guy gives back money that he owes to the husband to the wife, and she just goes ahead and spends it on a new article of clothing instead of putting it back in the bank, where they, then I could also hear where he could take the guy to Beis Din and said, "Who gave you the right to give this to my wife?" You know, my wife and I have an arrangement that she doesn't get to spend my money unless I give it to her as an allowance. Shomer. He is a shomer.
But why isn't the wife a shomer as well?
Because she was never appointed. I can't appoint someone else as a shomer. Like the Gemara talks about shomer shemas or l'shomer, right? I borrow your snowblower. I don't have the right independently to give the snowblower to somebody else to use.
I understand, but if I'm returning money to you and I say, for husband, right, I want you to give it to me, right, aren't you now the shomer for that action?
It depends if I take responsibility for it. If you, right, in other words, you owe Moish $1,000, and you say, Rabbi, would you mind giving this to Moish? Right? I say, yeah, I'm happy to do you a solid. Yeah, I'll do you a favor. But what if I lose the money by accident? It fell out of my pocket, So I might be putter as far as if it was an onus, let's say, but that still leaves you on the hook vis-a-vis Moish. You can't say to Moish, well, I gave the $1,000 in cash to the rabbi, so I'm off the hook. That's not going to help Moish. What happens between you and me, that may have to go to Beis Din, because was I negligent? Was I watching it properly? Let's see here. So the best policy that you should have is that when you want to return something that's a large item of value, it's best to always return it to the man himself, or at least get his express permission. Can I give it to your wife? Is there going to be someone at home that I can leave it with? And if the guy says yes, leave it with my kid, leave it with my wife, so then you're okay. Okay, we'll hold it here.